Good morning, Mom's Master Books. I hope you are having a fantastic week. Today is Thursday, which means it's Teaching Tips Thursday, and I'm talking about emotional intelligence, something that I think is very important. And why do I think emotional intelligence is important? Well, what good is intellectual intelligence or academic intelligence if we're never in a healthy spot to use it? If our brains are always in a bad brain emotional spot and we are not in our creative good thinking brain and are unable to use any of the academics that we've learned. Sometimes we're so short-sighted in teaching. We teach kids facts about history or science or different things, and we don't actually teach them how to use it and how to apply it in life. And we focus heavily on the academics, but we completely ignore the intellectual side or the emotional side of life. I believe most of us lose out on life because of the emotional unhealth that we have. And the more we focus on being intellectually or emotionally healthy and having our emotional intelligence intact, the more successful we will be in life and the more we will have an impact for the kingdom. So let's talk a little bit about this. From a spiritual standpoint, why is this important? Not just quality of life and health and happiness, but spiritually. Okay, so in the Old Testament, there's a story of when the children of Israel had left Egypt. They were in the wilderness, and God had promised the land of Canaan to the children of Israel. And so Moses takes 12 spies, he equips them, and he sends them into Canaan to see the land that they're going to take possession of. While the 12 spies are there, they see that the land is flowing with milk and honey, that it takes 2 men to carry a cluster of grapes, that it's just this amazing place that God had promised them. But what they also saw were the obstacles, and they saw the giants that were in the land, the viciousness of the tribes and the people that were occupying the land that God had given them. Now, God had promised this land to the children of Israel. He was bringing them out of Egypt to possess that land. But their fears and insecurities and what they saw consumed most of them. And so as they came back to Moses and the people of Israel, out of the 12 spies, 10 of them said, yeah, it's a land flowing with milk and honey, but the people there are too great for us. We'll never possess it. And they were emotionally unhealthy. Their fears overtook the creative aspect. It overtook the promises that God had given them. And that's where their focus was that emotional unhealth. Now, 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, said, no, God has given us this land, and this land flowing with milk and honey is our land, and it doesn't matter who the people are in that land. If God has spoken to us, this is what God has promised. Out of all of those tribes, only 2 of them got allowed to go into Israel. Joshua actually led the children of Israel into the promised land, the land of Canaan, to take possession of the promise that he gave. So we have 12 people who go into the land. 10 of those come out emotionally emotionally unhealthy, right? They took counsel of their fears. And when you take counsel of your fears and you begin to focus on the negative and the insecurities that you have and the past failings and all of these things, then that becomes your worldview moving forward. Where 2 of them said, no, God promised us this. So it doesn't matter that we're leaving a land of captivity and that we were once slaves. We are now conquerors. And only two of them out of all of these people were actually able to take possession. One of the things that I love about the Old Testament is, well, it gives us a history of who we are and how we got here. It also serves as a type and a shadow for the current believer. So in my own life, I understand that I was in sin and in slavery and bondage, that the Lord has delivered us from that, and that he is bringing me from that place of Egypt into the promised that he's given to me. And so through their journey and the mistakes that they made, I'm able to also look and say, don't make those mistakes. Don't look at what the Lord has called you to and only see the obstacles, only see the giants, only see the things that might keep you from possessing it if you know the Lord has called you to this and brought you to this. I believe this is so important for your children, because if you're watching this and you're part of the Master Books tribe, you're homeschooling because you feel called to homeschool. Your children's faith is very important to you. And your children have a calling. The Lord has set them aside to be prepared and to be trained to go after these giants and these Goliaths that exist in culture. They're going to stand on the front lines. They're going to face these giants that exist. And if they operate from a position of unhealth, emotionally, if that happens, they're not going to take possession of the land that God has given to them. We encounter that all the time in this what we've been called to with Master Books. And whether it's criticisms that we receive or people who don't understand the process or whatever, and we just have to remind ourselves that no, God has called us to serve this community, and to the people that he's called us to serve, we're to give ourselves and to do that without abandon. So I think it's very important from the standpoint of teaching academics is important, but teaching our kids to be able to manage their emotions is very, very important, because then they will be able to use the intellect that they've gained. And so we want our kids to be able to do that. Okay, so Scripture says at 2 Corinthians 10, 4 through 6, for the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. And this is where I see the spiritual aspect of emotional intelligence and what we're doing and how we're training our students to also walk in emotional intelligence for the calling that they have. And we have to take every thought captive. We have to look at the emotions. And when something happens in our life, we have to be able to look at, what triggered me. Okay, so this morning I wake up, I see an email. Immediately that email is a criticism of me. And as I look at that, I have two choices. Number one, I can take that thought captive and say, well, I'm not everybody's peach. It's not a big deal. The second is I can look at that and say, well, I've felt that rejection before. I felt that criticism before from the time I was young and when we were serving in this and when we pastored. These are criticisms that somebody has had in the past. And so I feel that pain. And so I can become emotional. I can become angry. I can become reactive. And so I have two choices when something comes forward. I think sometimes the triggers are great opportunities for us, because when I see something like that, I can step back and say, okay, this triggered a response that was unhealthy, and I want to be emotionally healthy so that I respond in control, not out of control. And in doing so, the trigger gives me the opportunity to say, why did this trigger me? Why was there unhealth here? And how can I be more intelligent and use my intelligence more creatively in the future? So I think we have to not beat ourselves up, right? Because, okay, let's be honest, most of us walk in enough self-pity and shame about whether we're getting it or not. And so everything I'm talking about today, as far as emotional intelligence, we need to create a safety or a safe place for each of us for emotional intelligence. There's room for growth. And I'm a growing person. And so, yes, maybe I was triggered yesterday, or I was triggered a month ago, and I was triggered when I was a child. But I'm giving myself permission to grow. And even when I did get triggered and I didn't get it all right, I still have the opportunity today to learn from that experience so that the next time it happens, I will be able to say, oh, I recognize this, but I'm not going to fall for that this time. And I'm just going to move forward, knowing that I'm taking possession of the land that the Lord has called me to take possession of. And I'm not going to focus on the giants or the intimidating factors that are here, or the criticisms or the taunts or whatever. I'm going to focus on what God has called me to. Okay, so something that this is kind of a bitter pill to swallow. So hopefully everybody can take it. And this is something I would say to my younger self, right? Is you need to toughen up, and you need to realize that you get what you lead. And as a parent, you are called to leadership. Mothers and fathers, you are leaders. And from the moment that baby comes out, you now command and lead a tribe, and you get what you lead. And the longer I'm a parent, the longer I spend with my kids, and I see my kids now as adults, I realize in some cases the tragedy of areas that I led in and that I didn't take it serious enough. In other areas, I see the successes of areas that I led in. But there's a law, John Maxwell talks about it in his leadership books, and it's called the law of the lid, which essentially says that the organization or the tribe that you're leading will never excel beyond the capacity of the leadership. So if my leadership skills on a scale of 1 to 10, if I'm an 8, I have phenomenal leadership skills, I'm paying attention to the right things, my tribe will never rise above a 7. If I want to see them rise to a level of 8, I need to personally rise to a 9, and then they'll rise with me. One of the hardest things for me in coming to the place of realizing this, I was pastoring a church. I was very frustrated with the people in the church and the church itself, and the progress that we were having. And I remember standing in the hallway in front of a mirror, and in the back of my head was this law of the lid and all of that, but I was still kind of in a victim self-pity mindset. And I'm doing everything, and why isn't everybody doing more? And I just remember the Holy Spirit very quietly speaking and said, you get what you lead, and everything that this church is experiencing is because of your leadership. And if you want to see this church grow spiritually, then you need to grow spiritually. If you want to see this church grow in worship, then you need to grow your heart of worship. It's not going to happen unless you take it there. One of my pet peeves in churches is, this drives me up the wall. A worship leader will say, raise your right hand, and everybody raise their right hand. Raise your left hand, and they raise their left hand. And then they say, oh, look, you can raise your hands. Okay, so now you have permission to raise your hands in church. But then when they go to lead worship, the worship leaders are all sitting there with a solemn face, and their hands are down, and they're tight. Their body posture is not worship. And so they expect people to worship, but they're not leading worship. They're just saying, we're giving you permission to do it, but we're not comfortable doing it. Well, if you want people to raise their hands and you want people to have freedom in worship, then you need to lead that, and you need to express that and show that so that other people feel comfort. It's same with our families. If we want to see our children prospering and emotionally healthy and intelligent, then we need to model that. So if this morning I'm crabby and I'm short-tempered and I'm reacting emotionally to my spouse and to the mailman and to the dog, then that's the model that I'm setting for my family. And so I have to lead a different example if I want my children to follow that. So the greatest way we teach our children's emotional intelligence is for us to be emotionally intelligent. And we're going to model that. And the things that are important to us, our children will pick up on. And so, like I say, that's kind of a hard pill to swallow, right? But I wish that somehow I had grasped this concept 20 years ago or 30 years ago when I first became a dad, and had some understanding that I was modeling everything. I was teaching them all day long, and everything I was doing was teaching them how to respond. Didn't matter what came out of my mouth. What mattered was they were seeing my response. They saw when I was offended easily. They saw when I was insecure. They saw when I compromised, all of those things. And some of those areas where I compromised became my children's struggles as adults. And so really grasping this concept of getting what you lead and the law of the lid. Okay, so let's say you understand. Okay, I get it. My kids are called to something special. They're to be world changers. I want to create that for them. I want them to be emotionally healthy so that when they step up to culture and they are overwhelmed by culture, and I mean, how could you not be? It's almost like impossible. Between gender issues and gay and lesbian issues and abortion issues and all these things we've got going on in a culture that's embracing humanism at an alarming rate and culture that's stepping away from church. So basically, they're stepping up to the border of Canaan. They're looking in and they're saying, we stand at this land that's filled with milk and honey, but the giants are huge. We want our kids to be able to say, but God has called us to affect this generation and to advance his kingdom no matter what giants exist before me, right? You get that and you want that. And you realize that you're the leader. You're setting the course for your home and for your family. So you get that. Okay, so how can we begin making changes? I'll give you one tip. I think it's really good to have people who speak into your life. This morning, I said to Kristen, I'm struggling in this one place emotionally. And she spoke truth into my life. And rather than take offense, I really wanted to listen to what she had to say. So if you have somebody that you trust, somebody that's in the zone where they're trustworthy, to be able to say, this is what I'm experiencing, and they can speak truth into your life and say, I think you're experiencing this because, that's phenomenal. But we don't always have that safe place. So a trick that I use that I would encourage you with is let's set up the scenario. This morning, what you faced as in your family. Maybe your morning went phenomenal. That's awesome. Maybe your morning was a train wreck. That's also awesome, because today it gives you the opportunity to evaluate it. So what I like to do is almost think of myself, stop for a moment and reflect. If I walked into my home this morning and I just sat in the corner and I watched me get up, me do my early morning chores and my early morning activities, my interaction with my wife and my family and everybody else, and I saw my responses to my emails and everything, what counsel would I give myself? If I was my best friend and I was in a place where I could actually offer some blessing and encouragement or correction to my best friend, what would I say to myself about my morning? Would I say, you know what, you did a good job. You handled that really well. I understand where you might have gotten offended by it, but I also understand how you overcame that and you did a good job. When I talk to my kids, would I say, you were so distracted, your children were trying to talk to you and you couldn't pick your face up off your phone, and they really didn't feel very loved or appreciated by you? It might be good if every now and then you just kind of set your phone down and gave them your attention. What counsel would I give myself if I looked at my life in replay this morning? Or maybe this last week in homeschooling, if I evaluate it from that standpoint as a third party, was I actually a good home educator? Like, did I make sure that I made that a priority and that I encouraged them, that I invested in them? Or was I just really distracted and frustrated, and everything, including the dog, frustrated me today, and I let everybody know about it? And I'm frustrated with my spouse, and I'm frustrated, and just, the world is coming apart. If that were to happen and you step back and that was your best friend, what would you say? Would you say, maybe your spouse deserves for you to scream at him? Maybe your kids deserve what they got. Maybe the dog deserved to be shut outside for the day. I mean, if how would you counsel yourself? And a lot of times you might say, right, I understand this is hard. Your spouse isn't acting the way that you think they should, but you can't change them. What you can change is you and your response. You can't change your kids, but you can make sure that you create a safe and a healthy environment, and that you do your best to, invest your time into them. You can say, listen, not everybody's going to love you. You're not the best peach, right? You're not their peach. No big deal. You just let that go. Know that you're ministering and serving a certain crowd of people, then that's great. I mean, there's so many things that I would counsel myself when I step back. So that's probably my biggest tip, the awareness that I'm setting the tone for my kids. And I know someday that they're going to step up to that place that the Lord has called them to possess. Their emotional health is going to be so important. And the way that they approach those next few steps in obedience. And I want them to do exactly what Scripture says in 2 Corinthians. For the weapons of warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations. That means taking counsel of my fears, and every high thing that exalted itself against the knowledge of God, making my emotional experiences, my unhealth, my fears, my anxieties, all of these things, exalting that above what the Word of God is that I know should be true for my life, to bring those thoughts into captivity and into obedience to Christ. So for me to say, you know what, Lord, you called me to this, you've purposed me for this, and even if I'm a Moses and I stutter when I stand before Pharaoh, you're going to use this. This is where we can say, no, my insecurities are too great. In case you didn't know, Moses stuttered, had a stuttering problem, and he didn't want to go before Pharaoh. So the Lord actually sent along Moses' brother because he said he can help you in communicating. But Moses still communicated, and he still was speaking to Pharaoh, but he allowed his insecurity and his handicap to paralyze him when God said, you can do this because I'm calling you to it. Okay. So in those places, I want my children also to be aware that their behavior, their emotions affect the environment that they're in. And so as I become a better leader and I become healthier, when I say, guys, we need to clean up the house, and all of a sudden they have a mental breakdown, my first response is emotional. I'm going to get mad. I'm going to start yelling. I'm going to start, saying, I don't know why this family doesn't help anything, and nothing that's productive. Or I can be calm, cool, and collected and sit down and say, listen, guys, we all live here, and the ability for this team to function like it does requires everybody doing their part. And we can sit here and feel sorry for ourselves and self-pity, or we can just apply ourselves, realizing that we're part of a team, that the world is about more than us, and we can work to get things picked up so that we live in a good environment. And helping them learn how to manage and cope with their emotions, even sometimes saying, why do you get upset? But a lot of times I notice that my kids will respond to circumstances the way I did. So if in the past I had to clean the garage and I would be like throwing things around and slamming in a bad mood all day, how do I expect them to be in a good mood when they're asked to clean their room? I mean, they're just modeling what I did, right? So at this level in teaching our kids, I think so much of it is on me. Now, you may say, guess what? I have a perfect personality, and I'm a 10 in leadership, and I have emotional intelligence, but my spouse, they're probably like a 2. And I think it's that, you're only as strong as the weakest link. And I'm pretty sure that my spouse is the reason that my kids are the way they are. Or maybe better yet, it's probably my mother-in-law, because my mother-in-law interferes so much. The kids are just responding to her. What about that case? Well, you can't change your mother-in-law, and you can't really change your spouse. The only thing you can do is continue to set a good attitude and a good example for what you have. If your spouse is open to having a conversation about their emotional intelligence and the example that they're setting, I think it's a good one. I remember the day that Kristen said to me, I think it's time for you to put your big boy pants on and start facing the fact that you've created most of the things that are around you. And that was a hard pill to swallow. And of course, I went to a bad brain spot with it. But at the same time, that was a real turning point in my life, because from that point on, I was having to look in the mirror and say, you're responsible, nobody else. You are responsible. And everything you experience today is a result of something you said, thought, or did yesterday. If you want tomorrow to look different, then you need to change what you're doing today. And some days I'm good at it and some days I'm not. But I realized that if I want those around me and those that the Lord has placed under my authority to achieve everything that the Lord has called them to, then I need to make sure that the level of my lid is as high as possible. And when the Lord reveals something in my life that isn't healthy, that I really challenge myself to say, ooh, I don't like this. I was only a 4 today, and I need to raise that bar so that those around me are challenged to also raise that bar and function. I'm telling you, the moment you take responsibility for your emotional health and step into that place of obedience, the people around you begin to as well. And especially when you're in leadership. Now, when you're under a covering, you're subject to the lid that they are, but that doesn't mean I can't push hard against that lid as well, and striving to be more healthy. So, okay, well, hopefully this was a blessing to somebody. And, why do we talk about these types of things on Teaching Tips, and how does it relate to the curriculum? Well, curriculum is only going to be as successful as we are as parents and home educators and as individuals. And we want to remove as many friction points with Master Books as possible, for sure. And we want you to succeed in homeschooling. We want your children to succeed. But beyond that, we know the call and the importance of the call that your students have. And whatever we can do to support you in that call, to help these students step into that place that the Lord has for them, and to be able to fight these battles, to be the Joshuas and the Calebs, rather than the other 10 spies who only saw obstacles. If we can do that, then we know that all the intellect and the knowledge that they're going to gain through young earth apologetics and biblical authority and the creation message and all of the gospel and all that they're learning through Master Books curriculum, it's going to be a benefit. So.